What if I told you that the most influential figure in human history was actually using advanced psychological techniques that wouldn't be formally discovered by science for another 2,000 years? That Jesus of Nazareth was implementing principles of social psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, and group dynamics with a sophistication that modern psychologists are only now beginning to understand. Today we're diving deep into the hidden psychological genius of Jesus Christ. You're about to discover 3 revolutionary techniques he used that became the foundation of modern psychology. And once you see these connections, you'll never read his teachings the same way again. If you're building influence or leading people, the most powerful psychological methods in history were hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. What Jesus understood about the human mind will change everything you know. Here's what most people completely miss about Jesus. They think his influence was purely spiritual or religious. But that's the surface level. When you analyze his methods through the lens of modern psychology, something extraordinary emerges. How did one man with no political power, no army, no wealth, manage to create the most influential movement in human history? How did his ideas spread faster than any viral content, without the internet, without mass media, without any modern communication tools? The conventional explanation is divine intervention. But what if there's more to the story? What if Jesus was intuitively applying psychological principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the 20th century? Consider this. Jesus consistently used techniques that modern psychologists now identify as the most powerful methods for behavioral change and social influence. Yet somehow we've overlooked this for 2 millennia. Think about it. Jesus never wrote a book. He never established a formal institution. He had just 3 years of public ministry. His followers were mostly uneducated fishermen and outcasts. By all logical measures, his movement should have died with him. Instead, it transformed the entire course of human civilization. There's a psychological explanation hidden in plain sight, and it starts with understanding his first revolutionary technique, the power of cognitive reframing through storytelling. Most religious scholars focus on the spiritual meaning of his parables, but they're missing the psychological mechanism that made them so incredibly effective. Jesus wasn't just teaching spiritual lessons. He was rewiring how people think about reality itself. And the method he used is now considered one of the most powerful tools in modern therapeutic psychology. Here's the breakthrough. Jesus was a master of what modern psychologists call cognitive reframing, the process of changing how people interpret and respond to situations by shifting their mental frameworks. Every parable, every teaching, every interaction was carefully designed to break existing thought patterns and install new ones. Take the parable of the Good Samaritan. On the surface, it's about helping others, but psychologically, it's a masterclass in breaking down in-group bias and tribal thinking. In first-century Palestine, Jews and Samaritans despised each other. They were tribal enemies. Jesus took this deep-seated prejudice and completely flipped the script. He made the despised outsider the hero of the story. This isn't just storytelling, it's advanced psychological warfare against cognitive bias. Modern research in social psychology shows that the most effective way to break down prejudice is through what researchers call counter-stereotypical exemplars, stories that present the despised out-group member as the moral hero. Jesus was doing this 2,000 years before researchers like Henri Teifel and Muzaffar Sherif would formally identify these mechanisms. But it gets deeper. Look at how Jesus structured his teachings. He consistently used what psychologists now call the elaboration likelihood model, presenting information through both central root processing, logical arguments, and peripheral root processing, emotional stories and vivid imagery. His parables weren't random stories. They were precisely crafted psychological tools. The prodigal son parable, it's reframing shame and failure as opportunities for redemption. The mustard seed, it's installing growth mindset thinking, the belief that small beginnings can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Each story was designed to bypass logical resistance and plant new beliefs directly into the unconscious mind. Modern therapists call this Technique, therapeutic, metaphor. They use stories and analogies to help clients reframe their problems and see new possibilities. Jesus was doing this systematically across entire populations with surgical precision. He understood something that psychologists wouldn't formally recognize until the 1970s. Stories change minds more effectively than facts. Think of the human mind like a computer with deeply embedded programming. Most of us run on mental software that was installed in childhood. Our beliefs about ourselves, others, and how the world works. These programs run automatically, shaping every decision we make. Now imagine trying to change someone's fundamental beliefs through argument or logic. It's like trying to reprogram a computer by yelling at the screen. The old software resists, throws up error messages, and fights back. This is why most attempts at persuasion fail. Jesus discovered something revolutionary, the power of story to slip past the mind's defenses and install new programming directly. When you hear a logical argument, your brain immediately starts evaluating, questioning, resisting. But when you hear a story, your defenses drop. You become absorbed in the narrative. Your brain stops analyzing and starts experiencing. This is exactly like a Trojan horse in ancient warfare. The Greeks couldn't break through Troy's walls with direct assault, so they hid soldiers inside a wooden horse, a gift that the Trojans willingly brought inside their fortified city. Once inside, the soldiers emerged and conquered from within. Jesus used parables as psychological Trojan horses. Each story was a beautifully crafted gift that people welcomed into their minds. But hidden inside each narrative was a powerful new way of thinking that would transform them from within. The Good Samaritan wasn't just about helping others, it was a Trojan horse carrying the revolutionary idea that our enemies might be more righteous than our friends. This technique is so powerful that modern therapists, marketers, and influence experts still use it today. Netflix builds entire empires on this principle. We don't just watch stories, we absorb the values and worldviews embedded within them. Jesus understood this psychological mechanism 2,000 years before we had the science to explain it. If this is exploding your mind, stop now and hit subscribe. What comes next will blow your view on influence forever. Now that you understand Jesus' mastery of cognitive reframing, let's dive into something even more sophisticated. How did Jesus create such intense loyalty among his followers that they were willing to die for him? How did he build a movement where ordinary people would abandon everything, their families, their careers, their security, to follow an itinerant preacher? The traditional explanation focuses on divine calling or spiritual transformation. But there's a psychological technique at work here that's so subtle, most people miss it entirely. Jesus was implementing what modern psychology calls commitment and consistency, combined with graduated foot-in-the-door persuasion. But he took these principles to a level that wouldn't be matched until the most sophisticated influence campaigns of the 20th century. Look at how Jesus recruited his disciples. He didn't start by asking them to give up everything and follow him. That would have triggered massive psychological resistance. Instead, he used a gradual escalation technique that modern psychologists recognize as one of the most powerful methods for creating deep behavioral change. Consider Peter. Jesus didn't approach him and say, "Leave your fishing business and become a martyr for my cause." Instead, Jesus started small. First, he simply asked to use Peter's boat as a platform to teach from. Small request, easy to say yes. Then he told Peter to cast his nets in deeper water. Slightly bigger ask, but Peter had already said yes once. So consistency bias kicked in. After the miraculous catch of fish, Jesus made a slightly larger request. "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." Notice the genius here. Jesus reframed the ask in terms of Peter's existing identity and skills. He didn't ask Peter to become something completely different. He asked him to apply his fishing expertise in a new context. This is textbook psychological manipulation, but in the most positive sense. Jesus understood that humans are hardwired to maintain consistency between their actions and their self-image. Each small yes made the next larger yes more likely. Here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Jesus was implementing a sophisticated psychological technique that wouldn't be formally studied until Robert Cialdini's research in the 1980s. He was using what psychologists call commitment escalation, gradually increasing the level of investment required from followers until they reached a point of total commitment. But Jesus added a genius twist that most influence experts miss. He combined commitment escalation with what modern psychology calls cognitive dissonance reduction. Here's how it worked. Every time Jesus asked his followers to do something that seemed unreasonable or costly, he provided them with a powerful narrative framework that made the sacrifice feel meaningful and heroic. When Jesus told his disciples to give up their possessions, he didn't frame it as loss. He framed it as gaining treasure in heaven. When he asked them to love their enemies, he didn't present it as weakness. He positioned it as divine strength. This is advanced psychological reframing at its finest. Modern research shows that when people make costly sacrifices for a cause, they don't decrease their commitment, they increase it. This is because the human mind cannot tolerate the idea that we've suffered for nothing, so we unconsciously increase the perceived value of whatever we've sacrificed for. Psychologists call this effort justification. Jesus understood this principle intuitively. He knew that the more his followers invested in the movement, emotionally, financially, socially, the more committed they would become. But he was brilliant about how he structured these investments. Look at the progression. First, small behavioral changes. Then, public declarations of faith. Then, social ostracism from family and community. Then, active missionary work. Finally, willingness to face persecution and death. Each step made the next step psychologically inevitable. This isn't manipulation, it's masterful leadership. Jesus was helping people become the best versions of themselves by gradually expanding their comfort zones and capabilities. Modern personal development experts use identical techniques. The difference is that Jesus was applying these methods with supernatural precision to create the most influential movement in human history. The result? Followers who didn't just believe in Jesus intellectually, but who had invested so much of themselves in the cause that abandoning it would have meant psychological annihilation. Think of commitment like a staircase. Most people try to get others to jump from the ground floor to the top floor in one giant leap. When someone asks you to make a massive change or sacrifice immediately, your natural response is resistance. Your brain screams danger, and you say no. Jesus understood something different. He built psychological staircases. Each step was just slightly higher than the last, high enough to feel meaningful, but low enough to feel achievable. And here's the key. Once you step onto that first step, momentum carries you forward. Imagine you're at a casino and you start by betting just $5. You lose, do you walk away? Probably not, it's only $5. So you bet 10, then 20, then 50. Before you know it, you've lost hundreds. But you keep going because walking away now would mean admitting that all your previous investments were mistakes. This is called the sunk cost fallacy, and it's one of the most powerful psychological traps known to human behavior. But Jesus used this same psychological principle for the exact opposite purpose. Instead of trapping people in destructive behavior, he was liberating them into their highest potential. Each commitment his followers made wasn't just an investment in his movement. It was an investment in becoming more courageous, more compassionate, more purpose-driven versions of themselves. Think of it like a fitness program. A good trainer doesn't ask you to bench press 200 pounds on day one. They start you with weights you can handle, then gradually increase the load. Each successful lift builds not just physical strength, but psychological confidence. Eventually, you're lifting weights that would have seemed impossible when you started. Jesus was a psychological trainer for the human spirit. He started with simple acts of faith and kindness, then gradually increased the spiritual and emotional weight his followers could handle. By the end, ordinary fishermen and tax collectors were performing acts of courage and love that changed the course of history. If you're watching this far, you are different. Prove it. Hit like and subscribe for all the secrets in my next videos. Now, we come to the most sophisticated psychological technique Jesus used. One that modern psychology has only recently begun to understand. How did Jesus create healing and transformation in people who had been stuck in destructive patterns for years, sometimes decades? How did he help people overcome addictions, mental illness, and deep-seated emotional trauma with just words and presence? The conventional explanation is miraculous healing power. But when you analyze Jesus's methods through the lens of modern therapeutic psychology, something extraordinary emerges. Jesus was implementing advanced techniques that wouldn't be formally developed until the emergence of humanistic and cognitive behavioral therapy in the 20th century. Look at how Jesus interacted with broken people. Take the woman caught in adultery. The crowd wanted to stone her. She was trapped in shame, probably convinced she was worthless, deserving of death. Traditional religious leaders would have either condemned her or offered forgiveness with conditions. Jesus did something completely different. First, he deflected the crowd's aggression with strategic misdirection. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. This wasn't just clever wordplay. It was removing the external pressure that was keeping the woman trapped in a shame spiral. Modern trauma therapists know that healing cannot happen while someone is under active threat or judgment. Then Jesus did something even more profound. When the accusers left, he looked at the woman and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Notice what he didn't do. He didn't minimize her actions. He didn't give her a long lecture about morality. He didn't require her to prove herself worthy of forgiveness. Instead, Jesus used what modern psychologists call unconditional positive regard. Acceptance of the person while addressing the behavior. This technique was formally identified by Carl Rogers as one of the most powerful catalysts for psychological healing and behavioral change. But Jesus added something that even Rogers missed. He immediately redefined the woman's identity and future possibilities. Go and sin no more wasn't a command. It was a declaration of her newfound capacity for different choices. Here's the breakthrough that connects all three cases. Jesus understood that lasting transformation happens not through shame, fear, or external pressure, but through what modern psychology calls identity-based change. He didn't just try to modify people's behavior, he fundamentally shifted how they saw themselves and their possibilities. Every interaction Jesus had with broken people followed the same psychological pattern. First, he removed shame and condemnation. Second, he saw and acknowledged their hidden potential. Third, he spoke to their future identity as if it were already real. This is now recognized as the most powerful approach to sustainable behavioral change. Consider Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector. Instead of condemning his greed, Jesus said, "I must stay at your house today." This simple statement contained multiple psychological interventions. Jesus was demonstrating unconditional acceptance, elevating Zacchaeus' social status, having an honored teacher as your guest, and implicitly declaring him worthy of respect and fellowship. The result? Zacchaeus immediately volunteered to pay back 4 times what he had stolen and give half his wealth to the poor. This wasn't forced repentance, it was organic transformation arising from a shift in self-identity. Modern research in behavioral psychology confirms what Jesus intuitively understood. People don't change by trying to break bad habits. They change by adopting new identities that make the old behaviors incongruent with who they are becoming. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, calls this identity-based habits. Instead of saying, "I want to quit smoking," you say, "I am becoming a non-smoker." Instead of "I want to lose weight," you say, "I am becoming a healthy person." The behavioral change flows naturally from the identity shift. Jesus was implementing identity-based transformation 2,000 years before we had the research to prove its effectiveness. He looked at Matthew, a despised tax collector, and saw an apostle. He looked at Peter, an impulsive fisherman, and saw a rock-solid leader. He looked at Mary Magdalene, a woman possessed by demons, and saw a faithful disciple. But here's the key. Jesus didn't just see their potential privately. He declared it publicly and treated them as if the transformation had already occurred. This is what psychologists call the Pygmalion effect. People tend to rise or fall to the level of expectations placed on them. Imagine you're trying to sculpt a masterpiece from a block of marble. Most people look at the raw stone and see only the flaws, the rough edges, the imperfections. They approach the stone with hammers and chisels, trying to beat it into shape through force and correction. But a true artist sees something completely different. Michelangelo said he didn't create David. He simply removed everything that wasn't David. The masterpiece was already there, hidden inside the marble. The sculptor's job wasn't to force the stone into a new shape, but to reveal the beauty that was already present. Jesus approached broken people the same way Michelangelo approached marble. Where others saw sinners, outcasts, and failures, Jesus saw hidden masterpieces. Where others used shame and condemnation to try to force change, Jesus used acceptance and vision to reveal the greatness that was already there. This is why Jesus' transformations were so profound and lasting. He wasn't trying to fix people from the outside in, he was awakening them to who they already were at their deepest level. When someone truly sees you not as you are, but as you have the potential to become, it creates a psychological phenomenon that researchers call the Galatea effect, the tendency to fulfill positive expectations we have about ourselves. Think about the most transformational relationship in your own life. Chances are, it was with someone who saw potential in you that you couldn't see in yourself. Someone who believed in your capabilities before you did. Someone who treated you with respect and dignity, even when you didn't feel worthy of it. That person was using the same psychological principles Jesus used. They were looking past your current limitations and speaking to your future possibilities. They were demonstrating unconditional positive regard while maintaining clear standards and expectations. This is the secret that ties all three techniques together: cognitive reframing through stories, commitment escalation through graduated investment, and identity transformation through unconditional acceptance. Jesus understood that lasting change happens when people see themselves differently, and he was a master at helping people make that shift. What we've discovered today changes everything. Jesus wasn't just a spiritual teacher. He was a psychological genius who understood the human mind with unprecedented sophistication. His techniques for cognitive reframing, commitment building, and identity transformation became the foundation of modern psychology, therapy, and influence. These weren't random methods, they were precisely crafted tools for human flourishing that still work today. Whether you're a leader, parent, therapist, or simply someone who wants to create positive change, these principles remain as powerful now as they were 2,000 years ago. The next time you read about Jesus, remember, you're not just reading spiritual texts, you're studying the most advanced psychology manual ever written. If these secrets exploded your mind, you need to see my next videos, but only if you hit the bell. Otherwise, you'll miss the most powerful secrets in history. What's your opinion? Leave it in the comments. Send this to that friend with sharp perception. Disclaimer. This analysis is speculative and based on public information and historical texts, not clinical diagnosis. The psychological interpretations presented are for educational purposes and represent one perspective on historical events and teachings.